I used to be a student for, I think, most of my years. I think it probably was more high school that there were exams, and then especially in college, I would say I'm likely not alone in feeling that there was a noticeable amount of dread that would occur before taking a test, or if there was some sort of paper that had to be handed in, there's a little more felt control in that manner. But this feeling of dread, this feeling of foreboding, what's going to happen, I don't know, and would often come over me for either hours, days before an exam. And as most of you know, if you study well and you know the material, there's usually not a lot to worry about. Sometimes we get a little disappointment because we were slightly underprepared. But if we were incredibly underprepared, then that's just the result there. Usually there wouldn't be such a good result. So I'm likening this also to what comes up for me when there's a Dhamma talk, and when I'm the one who's going to give it, and either a day before or you saw it yesterday when Ajahn said he wasn't going to be here. Very disappointing event. Then there's this feeling like, oh no, like why? And it doesn't matter how many times and it's that same feeling. And also it's interesting that another similar feeling I have comes up, although it's slightly different, but it's odd that it's a very same kind of dread, is that every other morning I'll do a fairly intensive workout, and by the end of it, it's just a short workout, but I'm totally exhausted. I'm like breathing extremely heavily and feeling very weak. And the night before, I'm like, oh God, it's coming. Oh no. And then right before bed, it's just kind of like, oh no, not again. But it's repetitive, and that's the odd thing, is it's how is something that is so familiar dreaded. It's just like, there's sometimes I give a Dhamma talk, I feel connected to it, and other times I don't. I feel like, that wasn't so good. And one consistency is my mom always writes me, and she says, that was great. I said, Mom, how can they all be great? I am your son, that's why. So I do have a little bit of a cheering committee, but I try not to let that praise go to my head. It's my mother, after all. So just in dealing with that feeling, I find that such a valuable experience to keep looking at. And, one of the things that I was recently talking about with Tanya Hemika was just a reflection on death and what that means. And Tanya Hemika was saying, it's usually the thought of death that brings so much fear, but dying might not be like that. And it's very true that for many of us, we think about our impending death, and it is impending for all of us. And especially we don't have control. It's a lot like that test that's coming up. We don't know what's going to happen. But often the confusion will be that, well, my experience now of death is not death. It's just how I am really creating. It's a sankhara. And we have a choice with how we relate to that. And very much like an exam, where we have a choice with how prepared we are for it. So if this kind of feeling of dread comes up, this is the big exam, this is the big kind of unknown that we're headed for, each one of us. And we do have time to really prepare for it. We have time to get ourselves ready, but we also have time to really focus on what is that feeling of dread about. I mean, I'm sure there are some people who don't feel that. But to really look at that and become familiar with it so that it is known, it's not something that is necessarily a problem. It's like, even though I do feel that about giving a Dhamma talk, or even just, work out the next day or whatever it might be, it happens anyway. The show must go on, and we are going to die. So we have these great opportunity to use our own reaction to that to really understand the Buddha's teachings around suffering and desire, and really seeing through the causes, the conditions that are continually having us be reborn again and again and suffer again and again. So for me, this is the reason I became a monk, was to really understand dying. It's something that comes up for me often and try to reflect on it. And sometimes I find it odd that there's times it's just like, it doesn't faze me at all. Oddly enough, I find that during the day it doesn't come up much at all. But every now and again I can just, in the evening time, just feel, oh yeah, that's right. Like, this is the inevitable end that I will face. I don't know if it'll be tomorrow morning or in the middle of the night, or if it will be something that is coming much later in life, or how it will happen, but it is coming. And so there can be that sort of, okay, this inevitableness of it, the dread of it absolutely happening. It's just an experience in and of that moment. I do have a choice with how I react to that. And just like before giving a Dhamma talk, that is the feeling that can arise. That is the thing that we actually can utilize to better understand our own suffering, to better understand our condition. And when we do that, we have really the greatest reward, because a lot of times we can remain in ignorance. We can choose to remain in ignorance and just ignore that. And I think most human beings do that in the end. Death, as the sort of great example, is just something that if all of us really understood how it could come at any moment, then I don't think a lot of the things would be said out of our mouths, or a lot of actions we would have done, or even thoughts. We would see the preciousness of our human birth. So this is just an encouragement to use whatever feelings come up, but especially when you do notice a sense of dread or fear arising. Just, it could be as simple as, the meal's not going to be ready, or my dish burned, or I'm not going to be on time for this or that, or you don't, you have some difficulty you have to deal with somebody else and you don't want to deal with it. Anything that kind of brings up that sense of fear is really an incredibly helpful tool, a helpful teacher for us to better understand the Buddha's teachings.